Okay. So my goal today, I really, really, really need you and want you to ask questions through the presentation. This is part of why I love global art history, is because it's not just about the art, right? It's about people and culture and civilizations. And so especially these content areas, um, I'm hoping that you're being exposed to new ways of thinking and new philosophies and new practices. And we should have questions about those things. So that's why I'm hoping that you will, open up your mute and ask a question when you have one. Because when I present, since I don't have double computers here, I can't see your face while I'm presenting. So I won't be able to see your hand up. Just unmute and chime in. Okay. We are actually starting the content of Asian art, and it's broken down into 4 smaller chapters. So we're going to start with Buddhist, we're going to then go into Hindu art, and then we're going to go into Chinese art and then Japanese art. And like I said before, we do have one image that is South Korean. So that covers like our Asian art. AP breaks it down different. So they break it down more geographically, like they'll break it into Western Asia, Southeast Asia. And I felt like that was confusing when it was just geographical, because then you're bouncing around on philosophies and religions and practices. You're like bouncing around. So I divided up Asian art differently and grouped them in those 4 ways. I think it's easier to process. Before we get started, does anybody have anything to ask about Asian art, Asian philosophy, culture, religion? Does anybody here practice or identify with any Asian philosophies or religions? No? So do you feel this will be new for you? Good, good. All right, well, let me get my presentation on. So I did just post the slideshow on Classroom, so it is accessible to you. And I have to sit down tonight and look at our calendar, beyond this week. But just my gut feeling is, we're going to talk about Buddhist art this week and next week during class time. And then whatever we don't get through, you will finish up through a screencast. So I don't want you to think that we're going to just talk about Buddhist art today, tomorrow, and then you're going to finish it all this weekend. This is a little bit bigger. Asian art is just a little bit heftier, even when divided up, than our other smaller content areas. So we're going to have more class days to process it. Okay. So I'm just going to be very honest. I get really nerdy during this content area because we are a Buddhist family. I do identify as Buddhist. I actually take a lot of Eastern philosophy as guidance in my life, but it's mainly based off of Buddhism. So I enjoy having a moment to talk about it and share. I pretty much like to keep a lot of, things at home pretty private, but this is a great opportunity for me to share with students. So when you do have questions, I just really encourage that discussion. So I'm going to go over some of the enduring understandings from AP that they want you to know about Asia in general. Like, you know, what do you need to walk away with after this whole entire Asian content area? So they want you to know that Southeast and Southeast Asia have, you know, ancient artistic traditions, a lot, you know, prehistoric traditions, just like Africa. They want you to know that great religions were established in Asia. So this is a very religion-heavy content area. They want you to know that Asian art is a reflection of Asian aesthetics. We've dabbled in that a little bit when we were able to talk about New Spain and just kind of the Pacifics a little bit, and how trade has allowed some of that Asian influence. But now you're really going to see how there is a very clear Asian aesthetic in art, and it's very identifiable. So AP wants you to be aware of that. And they want you to know that Asian art spreads throughout the world via trade, which we already talked about. So it's really hard to give a general overview of any religion, and sometimes you actually feel like you do it a disservice. But I'm really just focusing on the things that we need to know in order to understand the art, okay? So just general basic information on Buddhism is that it's a very old religion. It started between 6th and 4th centuries BCE. Yes, Buddha is older than Jesus. A lot of people don't realize that. So the other thing about Buddhism is that it's technically a dharma, or a philosophy, that is really not a religion. It's been identified recently, you know, within the last, you know, 50 years as a religion, as a world religion, but on a technical level, it is not. It is a philosophy. The reason it is not a religion because there are no deities, okay? Currently, it is the 4th largest world religion. It started in ancient India. It's based off of spiritual practices and beliefs. The founder is Siddhartha Gautama, and he is the person who actually became the Buddha. So we will talk a little bit about Siddhartha and who he was and his life. Eventually, with the spread of Islam, Buddhism in India was kind of merged with Hinduism. And then Buddhism kind of went a little bit more eastward and began to really spread in Asia and became really predominant in Asia. It's still practiced heavily in India, but really Hinduism kind of spawned off of that and became the state religion of India. The translation of Buddha is the awakened one. And just like many religions, there's, you know, multiple sects of religion, just like, you know, Christianity has, you know, all of their denominations. Buddhism mainly has 3 sects. So the Vajrayana, the Theravada, and the Mahayana, and it's mostly kind of geographic, which I have a map that will show you. And then, of course, there's, you know, different cultural and, you know, practices and things that are different between them. So really the root of Buddhism, it's really about compassion for others. It's about mindfulness, meditation, having the right intention, and really the main theme about Buddhism and the enlightenment that the Buddha had discovered is about the middle path. Okay, and we may get into that a little bit. So I just wanted to show you a couple of maps. The maps on the left is just kind of like, you know, some world religions. And then the map on the right is more about the 3 divisions of Hinduism and where they're predominantly practiced. So you can see it's pretty regional. And a lot of people who follow Buddhist philosophy, pull from all three of these different sects, because really the philosophy is the same, but just some of the rituals and practices are different. Okay. How are we so far? Any questions? Okay. All right. So basic Buddhist philosophy is I've tried to put it in kind of a timeline format. So the Dharma means the philosophy. If you had to like put Christianity kind of into a nutshell, that's kind of what I tried to do here for you. So you have to start off with the Four Noble Truths. And this is kind of like, what you have to accept and believe in order to, move forward in Buddhist practice. And the Four Noble Truths really do fall into accepting that life is suffering, and that the origin of life is suffering, and that there is a way to end suffering, and the way to end suffering is through the Eightfold Path. So that sounds really horrible, doesn't it? That sounds like super depressive, like you have to first accept that life is suffering. But that's not what it means. What it means is that we as humans, we claim and we cling and we attach onto things, and we have a hard time accepting the understanding of the impermanent state, or just impermanence in general. And so when we form these desires and we form these attachments, it creates almost like a selfishness, and that living in that state of mind is a state of suffering. And so ultimately, the state of suffering is called the dukkha. And so if you cannot find a way to free yourself from attachments, desires, greed, ignorance, being focused on the self, if you can't free yourself from that, then you'll never free yourself from suffering. So that's like the first step. You have to like mentally be able to accept that as true and real, okay? And then the next thing that you have to kind of agree with is the concept of samsara. So samsara is about rebirth. So Buddhists and Hindus, they really believe in the cycle of rebirth and reincarnation. So we're going to be hearing a lot about reincarnation during this content area. Reincarnation is the act of, when one life ends, you're reborn, into a next life, and that this cycle continues on and on and on. And how you lived your previous life, it will determine how you are born into your next life. And that whole concept is called karma. So karma is determined by the amount of craving and claiming and kind of your actions in that life, right? And if you have poor karma or bad karma, it means that you are not following a noble life, okay? And so if you have bad karma, that's going to determine what your next life kind of is like, what you're born into, okay? So you kind of have to accept or believe in that cycle as well, okay? Now, the goal, though, of Buddhism is to end samsara, that, being reborn again and again and again is the bother. It means that we haven't evolved and we haven't become enlightened. So the goal is to end it. So in Buddhist practice, there's the Eightfold Path. And this is kind of like, the doctrine that helps you live a noble life so that you can work towards ending reincarnation, ending samsara. Okay? So the Noble Eightfold Path is portrayed symbolically by this wheel. So you will see this wheel a lot in Buddhist art. And this wheel represents the Eightfold Path, which this is kind of the Eightfold Path right here. It's about learning how to have the right view or the right perspective, the right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, the right mindfulness, and the right concentration. So, you know, it's a lot kind of like the commandments, you know, how do we behave as humans that is going to make us be, you know, good, prosperous people and do good in the world. So it's about attaining your spiritual merit in this life, okay? And then if you're, you know, able to do that well, then the goal is that you will finally have liberation from samsara, and you can achieve liberation ultimately by attaining nirvana. So that is what nirvana is. You know, for a lot of Christians, they believe that if you do good in your life, right, you kind of have two choices: you get to go to heaven or you get to go to hell. For Buddhism, if you do really, really good, you get to experience nirvana. If you don't attain that, then it's like you keep trying. You know, you get born again, born again, born again. So that's kind of the duality of that. Nirvana, all that means, it's not a place. It's not like, you know, there's no heavenly gates. It's just enlightenment. It just means that you've obtained the purest and truest insight on impermanence and the non-self. So you've completely learned how to live your life in a state of non-self. So it's very abstract thinking. But the other thing that can happen at liberation, when you achieve nirvana, you actually have the option to come back as a bodhisattva. So that's what this means right up here, bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva means that you are an enlightened person. You have achieved nirvana, but you choose to come back and be born again to be a teacher and a leader to others. You know, so kind of like, you know, a saint or some, you know, one of those kind of statuses as well. In Asian philosophy and religion, you're going to see a lot of the gods and deities, even though Buddhism doesn't have gods and deities, but they will take on human form and be sent back to earth in many ways and for many reasons. So again, the same with Buddhism. A bodhisattva is not a god at all, not a deity. It's literally a human being that has attained enlightenment but chosen to come back to teach and to lead. Okay, so checking in with you. How are we so far? Like making as much sense as it can? Okay. Any questions before I go on? No. Okay. Does it sound weird? No. You're allowed to say yes. Okay. All right. Okay, so we need to take a moment to understand the Buddha, because most of the art we're going to see involves the Buddha. So Buddha was a person, a real person, and like I said, his name was Siddhartha, and he was born in Nepal, and his mom was a queen, Queen Maya, not from Nepal though, from India. She was traveling back to India, and it was through the travels that she began to have labor in Nepal. And when he was born, he was already kind of born a chosen one. There's, of course, a lot of, fables and myths and folk tales about Prince Siddhartha. But basically, he was born a prince. His father was a king, his mother the queen. He was born a prince. He was expected to, live his life as a prince and be the next king. That was his expectation. Um, he was a very kind and precocious child. He did get married and had a son. And when his son was very young, he actually left the palace life to become an ascetic. An ascetic is, kind of um, like a monk that is, looking for answers to spirituality. So he left the palace to become an ascetic, and his mission was to find the end of suffering. Okay. This all occurred because the king was told early on that his son was not going to be a king, but he was going to be one of the most important, people to walk the earth. But that wasn't okay with the king. He needed his son to become the next king. So what he did is he confined his son to the palace and created this facade world for him of complete luxury, and everything was in perfection all the time. And Siddhartha never knew anything about, sickness or sadness or anger or death. He was kept away from all of that. And making a long story short, he had kind of escaped the palace, only to experience for the first time death and illness and sickness and suffering and the poor. And when he experienced all of this, he realized that it was his mission to help and to find the end of suffering. So he went on a long spiritual journey, left, everybody at the palace, left all of his worldly possessions. And this is important because this is part of the symbolism you'll see in the iconic Buddha images. But basically on his journey, he learned about the middle path. And the middle path is important because that is how Buddhists believe you need to live your life. So you should not be living your life in either extremes. You should not be living your life as somebody that is full of being attached to possessions and greed, but you should also not be living your life, in denying yourself. So it's all about this middle path. Ultimately, when he found the middle path, he attained enlightenment. And he attained enlightenment underneath the Bodhi tree. This is also an important symbol in Buddhist art. And the original Bodhi tree is still a tree that can be visited in India. Once he attained enlightenment, he then, of course, went and taught his philosophy, just like Jesus, formed disciples and was able to teach people his understanding of how to live a proper life and to achieve enlightenment and end samsara, and ultimately got lots of followers. But what always attracted me to Buddhism is that he himself would preach that, do not worship me, for I am not a god, I am only a teacher. So he, never identified as anything but human, as a person that, was enlightened and wanted to share what he had learned, and, did not want to be worshipped in any way, shape, or form. His status as the Buddha, of course, came after his death. And so, during his actual life, he was, just known as Siddhartha. So moving more into Buddhist art, like we've learned a little bit about the Buddhist philosophy and then who Siddhartha is, who Buddha is. So now when we say Buddha, you know who I'm talking about. So these are some important symbols that you're going to see in Buddhist art. You don't need to memorize them, but you just need to be able to recognize them. So these are, you're going to see a lot of like lotus flower. Here's the Dharma Wheel. So this, remember, represents the Eightfold Path. This whole slide will be helpful to you because it identifies the imagery and kind of tells you what it represents. These are the main 8 ones. These are also some common ones. The unilome symbol, and then these are just kind of some other Buddhist symbols, not used as much. I think a lot of people are familiar with this one. This is the Om symbol. This represents, the state of meditation. But you're going to see this a lot in Buddhist art. So here's a lot of Buddhist imagery. And like I said, almost all of our Buddhist art will involve the Buddha. And so the Buddha is, every time you see a Buddha statue, we're looking at the same person, okay? So these are all forms of Siddhartha, once he became the Buddha. These statues, though, they differ in slightly different ways, and the way that they differ is his pose. And so those poses are called the mudras, okay? And the mudras are symbolic. So I posted up here, a lot of different mudras and what they mean. So, here, this one right here for concentration, both of his hands will be kind of folded in his lap, okay? Here, when you have, hands together, that's prayer or devotion. You'll also see reclining Buddhas, and that's your Nirvana Buddha. You'll see Buddhas that are standing as well, or you have this one where Buddha is taking a step, the walking Buddha. So you'll see a lot of different forms. Mostly you'll see him seated, in the meditation position. So then really like how his hands are, it kind of shows you the symbolism of it. The other thing that's common is not just his pose, his mudra, but also there's going to be some imagery, some common imagery that goes with the Buddha as well. So starting, just with this list on the left and looking at this image, pretty much anytime you see the Buddha that's, painted or drawn or, in a sculpture that has a background, you're definitely going to see the enlightened aura. So when he was under the Bodhi tree and attained enlightenment, it was through a state of meditation. And when he became enlightened, this, big aura around him was visible. So you're always going to see that symbol. You're going to see his eyes looking downward. Okay. You're going to see his hair. So he'll usually have some curls, and then usually his hair is up in a top knot, which, the Buddhist term is ushnisha. And what that represents is there are symbols of the Buddha that represent him as Siddhartha. And so the top knot is one of them, but also the elongated ears. So a lot of people always wondered, why does the Buddha have these like really long earlobes? So that's a symbol of him as Siddhartha. And when he gave up all of his worldly possessions and his worldly pleasures, a lot of what he gave up was all of his gold and his, royal jewels. And so by removing, you know, all of his jewelry from his ears and around his neck and everything else, it left the evidence of, you know, his lobes being elongated and heavy from all of that jewelry. So it's evidence of him giving up those worldly possessions. Okay. This meditation position of how they sit, you know, is the lotus position. And then oftentimes we already talked about the mudra pose, but then oftentimes on the bottom of the foot, you'll be able to see the Dharma wheel. And then Buddha is always sitting on some sort of, you know, pillar of sorts. They call it the predella, okay? So you'll never just see, you know, his body touching the ground. The predella usually has a lot of symbolism on it as well, okay? Up here in the corner, they look like little angels, right? But remember, it's not angels. For Buddhists, it's those bodhisattvas that have come back from nirvana. And I think I've covered pretty much everything there. Very rarely will you see him clothed. So you'll either see him in a loincloth, because when he gave up all his worldly possessions, he roamed the, you know, the earth in just a loincloth, but or you'll see him in kind of like the monk robing. Okay, so that ends a lot of the contextual stuff and then brings us to our first image for tomorrow. But I just want to know, with what was said today, if you know, have any questions. Yeah, Jude.
Ms. Michael, so could you be both Christian and like practice Buddhism?
Yes, you can. So that's another thing I really love about Buddhism, is they're accepting of all religions. They see that, you know, all religions are purposeful, important. They do not denounce anything. So I know if you are Buddhist, you are definitely allowed to participate and practice in multiple other religions. I don't know if it would work in the reverse.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anybody feel confused about reincarnation? That's usually a stumper for most of my students. No. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, just one question. So this is I feel like this is a bad question, but I think, is this sort of reincarnation like you're reincarnated as a human again, or can you be reincarnated as anything?
Why do you think that's a bad question? That's a great question. So, especially in Hinduism, like Hinduism's pretty strict about their reincarnation. Like if you did not live a noble life, then I mean, yeah, you can come back as an ant, you know, and be squished on the sidewalk. But culturally, I mean, and the same with Buddhism. Like you don't always come back as a human. It really depends upon how noble your life was. But at the same time, that's a big part of why, like, a lot of Hindus do not eat meat, you know, because of the concepts of reincarnation. You'll see a lot of devout Buddhists and Hindus be very, very careful about, you know, not harming any living thing. You know, I mean, legit. Like, so Tibet, if I don't know if you know anything about the Dalai Lama, but when they were building the palace in Lhasa, which is, you know, the royal city in Tibet, they didn't bring like big old construction crews to construct. Like you had men out there digging with shovels to construct, because then they would filter through the dirt and remove the worms. to make sure that they were not, so I mean, you have a spectrum, just like any religion. But for me personally, I feel like reincarnation scientifically makes sense. I mean, for me, because we're energy, right? So energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transferred. So for me, it's kind of a scientific possibility of reincarnation. Yeah, June.
I'm glad you mentioned like everything with Hinduism and the ants, because I'm sure I watched a documentary at one point about Hinduism and how like Hindus in their daily life try to stay away from harming absolutely anything. So like they're careful when they walk. And then you brought in that like you mentioned the ants. I could become an ant because people are afraid of harming the ants because that could be someone in their like future life. So
yeah,
I thought that was interesting.
It's very true. And like I said, it's a spectrum of devotion, right? Not everybody's like that devoted, but it definitely exists. But in India, there's some controversy with it, with reincarnation, because it gets tied into their caste system, which we'll talk a little bit when we talk about Hindu art. Their caste system is pretty intense. Like it's, you're born into a class system, and you really can't come out of it. And so that starts to tie into their reincarnation, which is, in modern society now is becoming very controversial.
Okay.
So there's controversy there.
How familiar are you with like, well, I'm pretty sure you're pretty familiar with like Buddhist rites of passage almost. Are there many? Because I feel like I've learned along the lines somewhere about like after birth and how a child, I might be getting this confused with another separate philosophy or religion, but after birth, how like the umbilical cord is cut, removed, placed in salt, and then along with like I think the parents or something, and it's placed underneath a tree.
Oh yeah, but I don't think that's Buddhist.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that is.
Right.
I totally know what you're talking about. So really in Buddhism is about, they don't have a lot of like symbolic rituals like that. It's really about how you live your daily life. Like you need to live a very disciplined life. And especially like when we start to learn about Zen Buddhism in Japan, like, oh, that's like very extremely disciplined for me. But disciplined meaning just mindfulness and being able to really not be self-focused. And so, I had the joy of spending a lot of time in Asia and living in Asia and teaching in Thailand. So I was able to be immersed in Buddhist culture. And their daily lives are immersed in giving to others. So, every morning at 6 a.m., the monks will come into the neighborhoods and everybody's out on the street ready to give alms, which is their offerings to the monks. So you feed them a bowl of rice, or you basically give them food and water. And it's all about this like giving and trying to be selfless, which is a big reason why I really was attracted to the philosophy.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting.
They're also very much into ancestral spirits as well. They do believe that they are kind of protected by ancestors, and you have to, once they have passed, you need to continue to recognize them and pay homage to them. And, so there's a difference between cultural, ritual, and religious. Sometimes they get all muddled up,
Okay.
But tomorrow, then, we will start our first few images. And you know, now they'll make better sense because you understand what people are thinking when they construct, you know, a lot of this Buddhist art. Okay. All right, so I don't know where we'll be, but either I'll see some of you at school or I'll see you all here. But that's all for today. Good? Ben, I feel like you're the only one still connected. Everybody's coming in and out. So, all right, guys, I'll see you.
Bye.